press. First, I would like to express my appreciation to the Electoral Commission for Sierra Leone for inviting the European Union to observe these important elections here in the country. I also want to express my gratitude to state institutions, judiciary, civil society, media, political parties, and other actors for the continuous cooperation during the course of the observation. The mission started its work on 11th of May and observed all stages of the electoral process up to date. Our observers are still at regional telecenters following the result processes right now. For the 24th June elections, the mission deployed more than 100 international observers in all 16 districts of Sierra Leone. The mission was comprised of observers from 26 member states and from Canada and Norway. In this regard, I would like to thank the delegation of the European Union here in Sierra Leone, embassies of the European Union member states, as well as Canada and Norway, who on election day enforced our mission with the locally recruited short-term observers. I would also like to thank my colleague, Yorgos Kyrtsos, who also is a colleague in the European Parliament, who led the delegation of members of the European Parliament who also joined the mission. Ladies and gentlemen, through the mission we saw that Sierra Leoneans' commitment to democracy. Yesterday we also saw a commendable patience and dedication. Many waited for hours to exercise their franchise and to cast their vote in these very important elections on Saturday. However, opening of polling stations were delayed in many parts of the country, primarily due to late reception of sensitive material. We had around 50 teams out and observing, and only 2 of them saw the polling stations opening on time. Positively, once polling station opened, ballots were cast in a peaceful atmosphere. Throughout the day, we saw long queues in 40% of polling stations observed. We also saw dedication from the side of poll workers who did their best to ensure that each and every one could cast their ballot. Many of the polling workers were young citizens. We also commend citizen observers. They deployed observers to all polling centers, which positively contributed to the transparency. And now about counting. In polling stations where poll workers knew all procedures they have to follow, counting was quick and efficient. However, we cannot overlook reports about intimidation and violence that marred the otherwise peaceful atmosphere in at least 6 districts. It has been confirmed that live ammunition was fired in Porto Loco, Freetown, and Coinadugo. Even one such case would be one too much. It created insecurity and fear for voters and poll workers alike. And it is important to note, our observers directly saw violence and unrest inside 7 polling stations during voting and in 2 during the closing and counting. Unrest and turbulence were directly witnessed by the EU-EUM observers in tally centers in Porto Loco, Freetown, and McKinney. Election observation is not a one-day event. To make an informed assessment of 2023 general elections, the EU-EUM started its work already in mid-May. Upon arrival, we saw that the ECSL appears to be operationally prepared to hold elections on time. Our observers saw training of temporary election staff, and it was overall positively assessed. However, procedures for tallying and results management came late. It clouded prospects of a transparent tabulation and results process. Thus, far in the tabulation process, it appears that those procedures are not always properly applied and not always the expected transparency in results management is achieved. And this brings me to one of the key issues observed during the weeks that the mission has been on the ground. The issue of transparency and timely and clear communication. Prior to the polls, the ECSL took positive measures to mitigate various shortcomings and missteps that occurred at various stages of elections.
You can be closer to the microphone, please.
Sorry, maybe you hear me a bit better now. Prior to the polls, the ECSL took positive measures to mitigate various shortcomings and missteps that occurred at various stages of elections. However, those efforts were eclipsed by insufficient transparency. As you all know, the political environment is highly polarized, and in such circumstances, lack of transparency is reducing the public confidence in the electoral process. So all things considered, we can say that the ECSL lacked clear, timely, and comprehensive communication with the broader public. It created uncertainties and reduced stakeholders' trust in the institution. The candidates' registration process was inclusive. We saw 13 candidates contesting the presidential race. 14 parties filed candidate list for parliamentary elections. In a positive development and following legal reforms, 32% of parliamentary candidates were women. However, we received reports that political parties were not accommodating this welcomed novelty and tried to circumventing the gender quota requirement. Regrettably, only 4 out of 63 parliamentary lists were led by a woman. It was also quite rare to see a woman as number 2 on the lists. And this indicated nothing more and nothing less, unfortunately, than a clear lack of political will. It is a right of each and every voter. It is a right of each and every voter to know their candidates, and this was not respected. Final list of candidates were published only a few days before elections. At least the presidential lists were made public well in advance. And now let us speak about how those candidates campaigned. Our observers observed more than 40 rallies in all 16 districts. The campaigns were engaging. At the start of the campaign, freedom of movement, assembly, and expression were largely respected. But then, closer to the election day, localized, politically motivated attacks by different actors happened in at least 6 districts of Sierra Leone. And we saw also, unfortunately, live ammunition being used by security forces at one of the main political parties' headquarters in Freetown. It left 1 person dead. And let me stress, elections are won through ballots, not bullets. Political violence, what we saw primarily in southeast of the country, shrank the space of political participation and hampered the level playing field. On a positive note, though, the new Electoral Act gave the Political Party Regulation Commission broader mandate, and on many occasions the PPRC mediated political confrontations. However, seldom its sanctioning powers were applied to ensure a full compliance with campaign rules. Signing of the peace pledge by presidential candidates did not trickle down to the districts. Clearer, timelier, and more resolved actions against harmful practices would have helped to uphold an issue-based campaign discourse. With no caps on donations or expenditures, better off candidates had a clear advantage in all races. The APC and SLPP were by far the biggest spenders, holding costly, large-scale rallies, dominating the outdoor advertising space and radio broadcasts. Digital ads were rarely used. Instead, the SLPP campaigned on official government websites and social media accounts, effectively blurring the line between governing and campaigning. Media plays a critical role during the election, and we commend those well-established broadcasters who offered a balanced coverage of campaign. Our observer observed political debates at various levels in all districts. Those discussions helped voters to compare lead contestants directly. Furthermore, there were debates exclusively among women candidates. Regrettable, however, the national presidential debate also planned did not take place. However, we also saw media poverty. And as a result of it, many community radio stations sold their prime time to parties or openly rallied either for the APC or SLPP. Such practices do not accord with the core principle of professional journalism and misled voters whose main source of news are local radios. During this campaign, social media affected also those who rarely use internet. Our social media monitoring unit recorded many aggressive and divisive messages that exploited ethno-regional sentiments and economic hardships. Such content was posted on political groups on Facebook and featured in comments on Twitter, creating insecurities for many voters and heightened the already polarized campaign environment. It was very encouraging to see how well-established media and civil society joined forces to counter disinformation. The National Fact-Finding Initiative, I Verify, used a multitude of digital and offline channels to debunk falsehoods prior to the polls and on election day. Media and civil society also played a decisive role in various voter information campaigns and promoted inclusive participation. Last but not least, I'd like to acknowledge the important role citizen observer and faith-based organizations played during the campaign. They monitored different aspects and stages of the elections and issued timely reports. Their reporting offered voters a non-partisan assessment of elections and upheld democratic values. As observers, we always hope to see democracy striving. As I said before, our observers are present right now and following the tabulation of results. And in this regard, I would like to stress the importance of transparency. We all know that political environment is tense. Hence, it is imperative that the Electoral Commission for Sierra Leone provides full transparency during the tabulation of results, and all observers have an unimpeded access to critical stages of the tabulation, including intake of result forms and data entry. Enhanced transparency measures would ensure confidence and trust in the electoral process. I will return to Freetown in some 3 months to present the final report. The report will be more detailed and will also include recommendations on how to improve future electoral processes. And I would like to conclude by stressing that there are no problems that can't be solved. It only requires political will and joint actions by all forces. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Evidenci. Now I will pass the floor to Yorgos Kirtsos, member of the European Parliament and head of the delegation.
Thank you very much. My name is Georgios Kyrtsos. I come from Athens, Greece. Is it functioning?
Yes.
Yes. My name is Georgios Kyrtsos. I come from Athens, Greece, and I'm a member of the European Parliament. With us also is Madame Virginie Zoron, who comes from Strasbourg, France, and it is my pleasure to address you today on behalf of the parliamentary delegation. First and foremost, I want to express our full endorsement to the findings presented today by my colleague, the Chief Observer, Mrs. Evelyn Cheer. I thank her for her work and cooperation, and I salute her dynamism. In the past few days that we have been here, we met with the President and Vice President of the country, the President of the Supreme Court, the Chair of the Electoral Commission for Sierra Leone, party representatives, religious leaders, civil society organizations, and media representatives. We would like to express our gratitude to them all for having made time for us. The Chief Observer has already given a thorough overview of the mission's preliminary findings, and I therefore wish to focus on those issues which we, as elected politicians, consider crucial. During our meetings, we heard that in the course of the electoral campaign, divisive language and disinformation campaigns were prevalent and aimed at undermining the electoral process by tapping increasing ethno-regional polarization. The electoral campaign was for the most part largely peaceful due to, among others, the positive role of civil society organizations and religious leaders who were involved in active conflict mitigation. Having said this, the run-up to the campaign did see instances of violence. Our interlocutors told us that the registration of presidential candidates was largely inclusive, but we were concerned to hear that there was misuse of state resources and public office. The lack of sufficient campaign finance rules also had a negative impact on the level playing field. In the course of our stay, we are told that the ECSL took steps to live up to citizens' expectations for a credible election. Nevertheless, according to our interlocutors, it should have been much more active in informing voters. Not doing so erodes their trust in its work. In 2022, the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act was adopted. It foresees gender quota provisions of at least 30% for the representation of women in public offices. This is undoubtedly a step in the right direction, but we believe that these provisions need to be clearer, in particular in terms of the ranking order of female politicians and also implemented by the political parties. Turning to election day, one European Parliament team observed in Freetown and its surroundings and another in Port Loko. The atmosphere on election day was relatively peaceful, but at times tense, largely due to the absence of essential material during the opening, which caused significant delays. Better preparation of the election day would have contributed to reducing much of these problems and resulting tensions. Furthermore, on the basis of our observation, promises of facilitating the voting of people with disabilities were not fulfilled. Moreover, in polling stations, there was some confusion about the time that the voting would end. Still, I would like to extend our sincere thanks to the polling unit staff. They did their best to ensure that proceedings ran as smoothly as possible. Above all, I would like to express our admiration for the civic spirit and enthusiasm shown by the people of Sierra Leone, who went to vote in such large numbers. A transparent tabulation procedure should honor voters' trust in democracy. I would now like to refer to the post-electoral period and send a message to the leaders and people of this country. First of all, my colleagues, parliamentarians, and I deplore the violent acts which took place both in the days leading to the elections and yesterday. Over the past 21 years, you have built a hard-won peace, a priceless achievement. Please continue on this path. Any dispute regarding the electoral process should be addressed peacefully according to the established legal procedures. It is also crucial that the judiciary shall perform its constitutional duties in an independent and impartial manner. Finally, I would like to reaffirm that the European Union will continue supporting Sierra Leone and its people. The European Parliament in particular is committed to enhancing its cooperation with the next government and parliament in the months and years to come, including with respect to the implementation of the EU EOM recommendations. Thank you for your attention.
And now we'll go on with a session of questions and answers to the Chief Observer. We will ask sets of 3 questions by 3 questions.
There was someone who took my microphone. Ah. I didn't know that they were. Okay. No, the microphone doesn't work.
Yes, good evening. I am Kim
Eve, the microphone doesn't work.
Yes, I am Kim Kaputaliba.
We try.
Okay. Please, let's start with this gentleman because the microphone is there, and then we'll pass the floor to you.
Okay, my question is, with respect to your observation of elections, what percent can you rate the transparency and credibility of these elections? That is one. Two, what recommendations do you expect from the European Union for subsequent elections as well in Serbia? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes?
Yes, thank you. My name is Kemo Chan, annual reporter. I also report for the Associated Press and the Nation Media of Kenya. You have painted a picture that suggests that the incumbent had unfair advantage over the opposition because they conducted the elections. They were responsible to make sure that everything was right, and clearly everything wasn't right from what we had. I would like to know, as a major partner to Sierra Leone, if you have any doubt as to the mandate of whatever government result from this. In other words, do you think, regardless of the outcome, whoever wins, they truly have the mandate of the people?
I am Foli Moribakonte and I write for the Calabash newspaper. After the 2018 general elections, the European Union Election Observer Mission also put forward some recommendations to the government of Sierra Leone. Now you've observed this particular 2023 election. Are you impressed with as to how the government has been implementing those recommendations put forward by the European Union?
Should we take?
Okay, this is already 3 questions.
Should we answer or should we connect?
Yes, we will answer now to these questions.
Okay. So thank you very much. I'll see if I get it closer. So thank you. We do like this. Thank you very much for the question, very important question, of course. The first question concerns the rate of transparency and credibility. As all other election observation missions, we don't rate any of the work that is being conducted, but we observe. And based on the observation, we are putting forward, as we do today, our first preliminary statement where we address shortcomings and problems. And in 3 months, we will be also making our final report public, which will be more comprehensive, and they will also be accompanied by recommendations. But as I also said in the speech, in my speech, was that the elections is not a one-day event, which means that the elections are still going on. And we will be able to give a more comprehensive view on the conclusions of the elections in the final report. But we do not rate transparency or credibility. And as concerns about the recommendations, what recommendations we can already make public. We haven't started with the work on the recommendations because the elections are not yet over. When the elections are over, we will take our time to write the final, compose the final report, and as I said, also with the following recommendations. It is once again important to note that the elections are not concluded yet. They are still ongoing. And it would be too early for us to present any recommendations at this stage. However, what we do is highlight the problems and challenges that has occurred until today. And will the new government have the mandate of the people? That is also not up to any election observation mission, the EU or any other to decide on. That is up to the people. But the elections are still taking place and they haven't yet been concluded. As regards to if we are impressed by the implementation of previous recommendations, as I understood. We had around 3 recommendations presented after the last elections, 30 recommendations presented after the last elections, and some of them have been accommodated. One of them that I also raised in my introductory speech was the one on at least 30% women on the lists. And there is also another legislation put forward, the legislation on women empowerment and gender equality. So some of them have been implemented. But what we do is also that after approximately half of the mandate, we usually also follow up with a follow-up mission to assess to follow up on the implementations of the recommendations. And this is, of course, being done with the government and with the competent authorities. I think I answered the questions in this round. Thank you.
Let's go for another set of 3 questions.
My name is Nani Chue. I work for Eagle Africa Radio. You make earlier
The microphone.
of during the election day, delaying of ballot box and other issues arise. What have you done? Have you engaged the electoral commissioner to see how best to be able to serve the situation? Secondly, now that the electoral commissioner has announced 60% of the election, what are we going to do to engage those 2 main political parties to see the one that's going to defeat on the results? Thank you.
Thank you. Next questions, please.
I am Isaac Kenisa Kamara, editor for Eden Voice magazine, Africa. My question here is, the electoral commissioner had just announced 60% of the results, and according to you as stakeholders, according to you as stakeholders, you did make some recommendations observations in as much as what you expect from the collaboration of Sierra Leonean stakeholders is concerned. And now that the 60% report has come, I would like to know if it works in accordance with your recommendation. Thank you.
Next question.
Hello, my name is Jumaba, CRGM Media, UK-based media institution. My question is with regards to confidence and trust. That has been a big issue mostly for citizens. Citizens are anxious. Citizens don't have confidence in state institutions. And now the EU and other observer missions are recommending, but the process is still ongoing. This is a critical stage. Results are going to be announced. What is the role, what will the European Union, not just the observers, what would you recommend to the European Union to ensure they protect citizens, they stand for citizens, being that there's already a mistrust and that has been captured in more or less all the reports from observers.
Thank you. Let's go for these 3 questions. Please.
Okay. So thank you once again for the question. I will see if I were able to capture all the questions. First, the issue of ECSL and the delays. The mandate of the election observations is to observe. We cannot intervene or interfere. What we do is observe, and based on the observation, we will be putting down our recommendations. However, we did see that only 2 of almost 50 polling stations that our observers observed opened in time, but the rest were delayed. Most of the cases, the polling stations opened after approximately 1 hour, but there were some cases that opened a bit later. One of the polling stations I myself observed. But this is included in our preliminary report, and this will also be included in the final report with the recommendations. On the 60% of voting is done. Was it in accordance to the recommendations that EUM put forward after the last elections, as I understand the questions? As we are stressing here today, there are many challenges and many problems to be addressed. Issue of trust, issue of transparency, issue of communication. And trust, the best way of ensuring and increasing trust is to be as transparent as possible and to communicate as timely as possible with clear answers as possible. And we have seen, unfortunately, during the process, not only during the election day, as I said, election is not a one-day event, it is a process. During the process, the ECSL should have communicated more clearly and addressed the problems occurred timely. So we will be putting forward our recommendations later in a couple of months. But we have observed this, that there are shortcomings and problems yet to be addressed. And about the confidence and trust at this critical stage and the mistrust. Yes, as I agree, there is a mistrust, and the mistrust can be addressed through more transparency and better communication. And the elections are not over yet. So it is important at this critical stage of the electoral process that there is access to the tabulations, during the tabulation process, including when putting in all the data. So we need to, the ECSL need to ensure that all observers have the access into observing the elections as it should be observed. Is there any questions that? So as you see, my answers on all the questions that were addressed in this round concerns trust, concerns transparency, and concerns communication. Trust and communications are important for ensuring trust among the population, for the political parties, as well as for the different institutions in these countries. We have observed that there is lack of trust in some of the institutions. I think we'll take 3 more questions, 1 more round.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Mohammed Elba, proprietor of Sleeping Times newspaper. Initially, when you are actually moving into a report, you mentioned that elections are not to be won by points, but rather by ballots. I want you to elucidate further on that. And the instances you highlighted where live conditions were fired, how much do you think that has the potential to undermine the entire credibility of the elections, if at all? Also, I did not hear you capture the role social media play, in the entire electionary process, more so misinformation and disinformation. I did not hear you capture that. When we have been in Sierra Leone, we know the role, misinformation and disinformation play prior to the elections, and we all know that led to the August 10 riots in Freetown that left several people dead. And it is continuing. So I wonder why that did not, be a concern for you in the entire monitoring process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we bring the microphone to this side? There are many questions on this side.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I am Reverend Usman Fona. I'm the General Secretary of the Interreligious Council of Sierra Leone. I know the European Union has poured a lot of money into this country. In Africa generally, when people hear that election observers, like the European Union, are coming to a country, the expectation is that things are going to be perfect in terms of advising, intervening into the system, and making sure that they address challenges on the spot. You've already answered that you do not have that mandate, so it's very clear in my mind. But I want to say, when people hear this kind of situation, they feel like very disappointed in terms of the expectations. For further investigations or observations, is it possible for the EU to revisit that mandate and see the possibility of you meeting the expectations of the people in terms of intervening and addressing the problems on the ground? For example, you have mentioned about the challenges in Italy of the results and many other issues. If we are expecting that you will advise the ECSL on the spot to ensure that they practice the right thing in order that more credibility will be given unto them, so that the result will come out and be accepted by all and sundry. Is it possible for you to expand the mandate from just observing to monitoring and intervening when there is a need on the field?
I think I will, if I answer those and then we take, because it was a lot of questions. I answer them and then we take one more round because it was a lot.
We will answer this question and then we will get a last set of questions.
Since it was quite a lot of questions in one round, I thought it's better to address them sufficiently, and then we'll go one more round. First, maybe I start with the last questions about the EU mandate and if we could intervene. When it comes to the EU elections observation mission, as all other election observation missions, it is about observing and then putting forward, making or putting forward the report that include the whole observation process, including recommendation. And the recommendation actually is our way and our commitment toward the people of Sierra Leone, where we suggest different way of addressing the shortcomings and the problems that we have observed during the electoral process. However, the election observation missions are not the only cooperation that we have with Sierra Leone. We also have it through other ways. We have the EU delegation, for example, here in Sierra Leone, in the country. We also cooperate very well internationally with Sierra Leone. I want to congratulate the people of Sierra Leone for the position and the seat in Security Council in the UN. This really shows the important role that Sierra Leone has here in the West African region, in Africa, and it's an important partner of the European Union, as well as an important role globally. That's also the sign of the seat gained in the UN Security Council. So the election observations have its role, but then there are cooperations through other ways also, between the governments and between the people. And I would personally also want to see it even more strengthened. And when it comes to there was a question about the sentence on not won through bullets, but through ballots. It is always important that any kind of dispute is solved through dialogue and through using the legal means. And disproportionate force is not the way of calming down the situation or increasing trust. Therefore, it is unfortunate that we have seen the use of live bullets that have led to death. The violence violence wherever it is used is unfortunate because it leads to insecurity among the polling staffs and among the people, and fear among the polling staff and among the people. So violence can never be the solution on any disputes between different actors, between political parties, nor between institutions and people. The role of social media, I actually did address, but I can highlight it once again, because the role of social media is important. As much as we are moving around offline, we do also spend a lot of our time online. That means that what happens online affects us also offline. And we have seen wording used that have led to increased polarization rather than unifying people, unifying the people here in the country. However, and I should say, disinformation and misinformation is a big problem that I also addressed. I, however, want to applaud initiatives as I Verify that took an important role on very quickly confirming or de-announcing the information or the disinformation that has been spread. So I would like to really applaud I Verify and all other actors that took responsibility on ensuring that disinformation and misinformation was not met by silence. Yes, that was the questions.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Of course, I fully agree with Evin's, the information she gave you and the analysis. I would like to address you not as a politician, but as a veteran journalist, because before becoming a member of the European Parliament, I was a journalist for several decades. And I have to tell you that I admire your professionalism and your dynamism, but journalists always move faster than politicians, because you want to bring about the news, but we have to follow procedures, because we are here to observe, to describe and to underline, and of course we'll reach some conclusions and we'll make them public. But you shouldn't push us to jump into conclusions, and we won't jump anyway, because by doing so, we can compromise our impartiality and effectiveness. So I just want to describe our two different roles and congratulate you for your professional quality.
Thank you. And now the last set of questions.
Thank you, sorry. So Portia Crow, AFP. You mentioned some violence at the beginning, although it was a little bit difficult to hear the first few moments of when you were discussing the violence in different areas. But I wonder, is this in line with past elections, or has there been more violence than usual? It would be just good if you could contextualize that a little bit for us.
Hello, my name is Nimra Sultan. I'm a reporter from Rising. And you mentioned that on the day for voting, only 2 police stations started on time. Did you do a follow-up to check or to know or find out if people stood at the queue till 5 p.m.? Because by 5 p.m. Queues were closed. For people who stood there and waited till it was 5, if there were any consideration made for them to vote. Because where I worked on that day, as it was 5 p.m., they told everybody that voting was closed. So a lot of people on that day didn't vote. Did you any follow up on the stations that you mentioned didn't open on time? Thank you.
Of Tumakredi. Contemporary African problems often result to the same thing: post-election violence, doubt, an atmosphere of fear by the people. The question I want to ask: there have been many challenges, many inadequacies, and with the high presence of the international observer missions in the country, we were able to see all of these things. But we've just been told in the various press conferences that you're just observing and not monitoring. And years before now, we made recommendations, and those recommendations were to be adhered to. So, with the problems like late arrival of sensitive materials, late arrivals of polling staff, and late opening of polling station, and those who get deprived or not given access to vote, even they have voting slips or other form of identification, they didn't find their names recorded in the voter register, and they were disenfranchised. So I don't know, were those part of your recommendations, or do you want to make them now part of your recommendation for future projects?
Thank you. Now, Evan.
Thank you very much. First, about the violence, to compare it to the last elections. I would like to stress that we do not compare elections with each other. All the elections are one of a kind. But what we do is observe the election, and based on the elections that we are observing, we will, of course, put forward on recommendation to address those problems and challenges that occurred during the process until now, and what we will be observing also until the election process is concluded. But there has been violence incidents, and it is worrying, and as I also have mentioned, it has led to fear and insecurity among the population as well as those who have been working at the polling stations. I really, really want to applaud everyone who was working at the polling stations as well as the whole population of Sierra Leone. Some even came to the polling stations 5 in the morning to cast their votes and stood in the queue in a peaceful way for hours to be able to use their democratic right to cast their vote. I also want to applaud the polling staff members. Some of them didn't even sleep at all during the night before nor the night after. So all of you have taken a big responsibility and have really shown your commitment towards the democratic process as you have done since the end of the Civil War. It is the 5th election the country is conducting right now. And I would just want to encourage to a peaceful continuation of the elections and encourage and call on to the competent authorities to ensure transparency and good communications until the elections are concluded. Only 2 polling stations of those we observed were opened in time. Most of them opened within 1 hour. A few of them, it took a bit longer time to open. As regards to the closing, it is unfortunate that during midday there were different information that was spread about what to expect for the closure of the polling stations. However, at 3 o'clock it became clear what would be the rule. This should have been communicated more clearly and more timely in advance. In some places, our observers observed huge queues, big queues at 5 o'clock, and those that were standing in the queue had the possibility to cast the votes in accordance with the regulations. Because if you were standing in the queue before 5 o'clock, you were also supposed to be able to cast your vote. Okay, so I think I also answered the last questions among the first questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we will end the live streaming and we will proceed to one-to-one interviews. Thank you so much for coming in numbers, and thank you to the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of you for coming today.
What is now abundantly clear is that the 10 years of APC misrule and economic mismanagement has definitely created considerable suffering for the people of this country. From Kamakwie to Pujehu, from Kono to Freetown, and everywhere, people are suffering under the weight of corruption and the mismanagement of the All People's Congress. I have seen it at first hand, from Falaba to Kedima and from Kailan to Putloko. The people want change. The people are tired of the suffering of paying for a bag of rice at 200,000 from only 60,000 in 2007.
During the 2018 debates, we see some candidates and they say, oh, this country don't have for corruption, we don't have for this, the price of rice, and all increase from 60,000 to 120,000.